The evolution of the concerto has reflected a symbiotic relationship between instrumental and vocal music throughout history. My name is Libia Montaño, and in this lecture recital, we will focus on the concerto's origin in the Baroque period and its development through the classical era. The goal is to provide a new perspective on the interrelationship between musical genres, thereby promoting a deeper appreciation of musical innovation, examine how their interactions between vocal and instrumental forms has influenced the evolution of the concerto, and to identify how vocal techniques and opera structures have been integrated into instrumental music, enriching its expressiveness and structural complexity. What you just have heard was the beginning, the prologue, La Musica, from the opera La Favola d'Orfeo, composed by Claudio Monteverdi in 1607, considered by many to be the very first opera. And this is like this because Daphne by Jacopo Peri is not entirely preserved, and Euridice is the other opera written before by Jacopo Peri also. It wasn't structurally formed, the orchestra like Monteverdi did in this one, in the Favola d'Orfeo. In the prologue, we can see the structure of the ritornello. The ritornelli was one of the many structures that was created during the Baroque period, and it's this part that is constantly repeated one after the singer is doing is much longer than I just did. But for you to make sure that you remember the ritornelli, I will ask Juvenal to make one of the ritornello. So this interaction is like one of the structures that created later on what we just known as the concerto. Let's see now what is this is all the structures and forms that already they were created during the Baroque period. There were a lot of structures, but at the beginning it wasn't so distinctly the voice, like the vocal performance, it was so different from the instrumental performance, instrumental composition. Okay, now let's see what is a concerto. A concerto is a musical composition where an instrumental soloist is accompanied by an orchestra. Normally, it usually consists of 3 movements: fast, slow, and fast. Now, let's explore. This is the 3 movements: the fast, the slow, and the fast. And now let's see his evolution and explore his history. In the 16th century, concerto referred to both vocal and instrumental groups as well as to contrasting musical textures. Over time, the term evolved to denote music performed together, and later on compositions that were technically elaborate or virtuosic. The formal use of concerto in music titles began in 1587 with a collection by Andrea Giovanni Gabrielli, but it was not applied to purely instrumental music until 1621 with Dario Castello, Sonate concertante in stilo moderno. The term concerto means in Italian to be agree, but in Latin it means to be against with each other. So it's like a game where the soloist is interacting by the orchestra, with the orchestra. This originally, the terms concerto, sonata, and symphony were often used interchangeably, and it means similar things, but later on, the concerto grosso began to assume a clear identity by its own. The concerto grosso contrasts a small group of soloists, the concertino, with the full orchestra, the tutti, enable dynamic interactions between solo passages and orchestral sections, A remarkable example of a concerto grosso is the Brandenburg concerts by Johann Sebastian Bach. This interaction would be fundamental to the later evolution of the concerto as a musical genre. Now, do you remember that we talked about the three movements, the allegro, the adagio, and the allegro is the fast, slow, and fast? Now we're going to focus on the first one. The first movement of the concerto is a variant of the sonata form and the ritornello together, like we just heard in the beginning in the Orfeo. It's the sonata plus the ritornello. This variant constitutes the type 5 in the taxonomy of Leopoldowski-Darcy. Here we can see the structure of the sonata. Like it's clear seeing the structure of the sonata. We have the exposition, then the development, and then we have the recapitulation. But this structure is considered well known as the concerto form. But in order to be a concerto form, it has to be in an interaction with the orchestra. It's very important to have then the solo passages. And we can see first is the ritornello of the orchestra. We have the solo passages, then the development, and like that. It's interacting. And this is the concerto form. So it's the first movement is the concerto form. And a final cadenza at the end. This cadenza at the end will often improvised by the soloist. It wasn't written. Like in the classical era, the composer wanted to write exactly what they have to play. But in this era, it was like very virtuosic to show off the soloists can make ornamentations and have freedom in that moment. The sonata form was formalized in the classical period and is a direct evolution of the sonata da camera. It's a similar structure. It has the three parts. But this also shares a similar form to one of the most prominent structures used in the consolidated Baroque opera. Can you guess what is it? The one that maybe shares some similar structure?
No, someone else.
The aria da capo. The aria da capo is a very basic structure. We all have to sing this. It's a part A and part B. And then we repeat the part A. And in the part A, normally we can make ornamentations and we can make variations and add some things. In this period, it was allowed the performer to do whatever he wants in this part, repeating. So now I will sing a da capo aria. This is one of the more known operas written by Georg Friedrich Händel and libretto by Nicola Francesco Haim. In this opera, if you have the program, you can see the text. She's speaking about Cleopatra is crying and is in profound suffering, and then she will make a promise, she will hunt his enemies like a ghost. Okay.
Piangerò, piangerò.
The extravagant flourishes of Baroque ornamentations, although admired by their display of virtuosity, ultimately become so excessive that they mask the music's original intent as envisioned by the composer. I will ask Juvenal to see if you can recognize, it's a very recognizable melody. Then you can see another level of ornamentation, and then the next level that the ornamentation is so much that you can't almost identify what's the original melody. Exactly what was happening with the opera. It was excessive. So in order to reform serious opera and its excesses, Gluck Christoph Gluck advocate for the simplification of music and drama, dramatic coherence through accompagnato recitatives, and favored the use of mythological themes that emphasize simplicity, emotional truth, and moral clarity. Next, I will be presenting one aria for his first reform opera. The musicians aim to capture in the performance the same level of emotional expression that the singers can convey through lyrics. This suggests a focus on phrasing, dynamics, articulation to evoke feelings and narrative, much like the vocalist's would use the nuances of language in song. The solo concerto, I'm so sorry. Technological advancements in instruments construction also significantly contribute to this expressiveness potential. Violinists such as Leclerc, Pietro Locatelli, and Giuseppe Tartini elevated the violin's virtuosity in concertos influenced by the rich Italian and German traditions with Torelli, Albinoni, Vivaldi, Telemann, and Bach. The solo concerto emerged as a vital platform for composers who were also performers. These formats occasionally extended to the theater, finding a special place as opera interludes, a practice notably embraced by Francesco Maria Veracini. Carl Philipp Bach Emanuel and Johann Christian Bach significantly influenced the concerto form. Carl Philipp Emanuel bridged the Baroque and classical styles with his keyboard concertos, contributing to early evolution of the classical concerto. And Johann Christian enriched the classical style, influencing Mozart, especially in piano concertos. The Viennese triumvirate refers to the three great composers of the classical era in Western music who were also active in Vienna in the late 18th and 19th centuries: Joseph Haydn, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and Ludwig van Beethoven. These composers are crucial in the history of classical music for their innovative contribution to the development of key musical genres such as the symphony, string quartet, sonata, and concerto. Joseph Haydn is also has the name of the father of the symphony or the father of the string quartet for his pioneering work that laid the groundwork for future musicians and musical developments. He composed 36 concertos between 1755 and 1798 for a variety of instruments, highlight his broad musical genre. Mozart composed around 45 concertos from 1773 to 1791, and including a variety of instruments, also notably 21 for piano. His last 8 piano concertos are celebrated for their dramatic depth and innovation. And also the Sinfonia Concertante and the Concerto for 2 pianos are one of his most esteemed works. Ludwig van Beethoven, he was the transition of the classical era and the romantic era, revolutionized music with innovations in harmony and structures. He doesn't have a lot of concertos, but the concertos that he have are really celebrated, like the Emperor Concerto. Together, these 3 composers represent the zenith of the classical music in Vienna and have lasting legacy that continues to influence contemporary Western music. These are some examples. At the end, you will have more information about this subject, and I also have a playlist in my channel that is all the concertos that you can see here. So if you want to see very good performances. So in summary, since its establishment around 1750, the concerto has evolved into a crucial musical composition that showcases a solo instrument against the backdrop of an orchestra ensemble characterized by a dynamic relationship of alternation, competition, and combination. This genre, integrating vocal expressiveness and instrumental virtuosity, typically unfolds a 3-movement cycle: fast, slow, and fast, and incorporates forms like sonata, ABA structure, variations, and rondo. And distinct from the sonata, the concerto's dialogue between soloist and orchestra emphasize the soloist's virtuosic role, often highlighting an improvised cadenza, as we say before, tracing its journey from the Baroque era to the Concerto Grosso and the solo concerto and the classical and romantic periods, and its resurgence in modern times. The concerto has remained a vibrant part of musical literature and performance, reflecting its adaptability and enduring appeal across various musical and social contexts. Now, to conclude, I will sing one aria that it has exactly the structure of the concerto form, and it's very interesting because now we don't have concertos for solo voices. There are like one or two examples, but in that moment, as we say, the composer did indistinctly for the voice and for the instruments. So Mozart, what he did in this opera and in many other operas that he have is the exactly form that he used later for the concerto. So not just pay attention to my performance, or you have to, but also to the structure. That if you can see where's the development, where's the cadenza, and also have a little trill cadenza at the end. before question and answers, I would want to say thank you to Professor Dondas to guide me during this period. I have been very, very hard to work in the lecture recital. Speaking and singing at the same time is very difficult. When you have to do it, you will see. And to Professor Galland, because he introduced me to this wonderful theme that I really enjoy presenting it, because it's something that I discovered a lot of things. I did a research very profound, and it was because of this opera in analytical techniques. I will say thank you also to Professor Dr. Kare, for all her support. She's always there. And to Professor Tintes, because she also speaks a lot about the Bach songs and all of the people that I mentioned here. It was something that we saw during class. So I have to say thank you to all the professors that guides me in this journey. Now, if you have, I didn't see, she's at the side. But thank you also, Professor, to be here and also to support the vocal department as always you do. Okay, so I want to say, can we have an applause for them? So, someone have a question?
I don't have a question. I just wanted to make something clear to, oh, by the way, yes, this did grow out of analytical techniques, because let me just give you the background. We were talking about concerto, and so I think Libia volunteered to talk about this one aria from Lucio Silla, and I made the point, or rather you made the point for me, that really when was it written? Like 1774, I'm guesstimating, 1774. The violin concertos date from 1775 mostly. There's really practically no difference in the form. In fact, the first movement of the third violin concerto borrows from an aria from Euridice. Now, when he was writing these big opera seria arias, he hadn't written original instrumental concertos yet. All those early concertos are pastiche concertos. He takes sonatas by Johann Christian Bach or whoever and adds ritornelli. That was sort of how we trained. But the other point I wanted to make is, when you heard her sing the Händel aria, that was a da capo aria, but the outer sections were closed, those so-called A section. They were harmonically closed. With the Mozart, what he does is he takes the initial A section, makes it a huge, concerto sonata exposition, and it's harmonically open. It ends in the dominant key. Could be a different key, could be the relative major if it were a minor, but whatever. Okay, and then he's got that central section, which plays the role of a development. And then the da capo is not a literal repeat or even just a merely ornamented repeat. It actually rewrites the first section so as to remain in the tonic. So it's a recapitulation. So, of course, it makes for a very long aria, especially then you have the ritornelli in between. And, of course, a whole opera of that. Well, that's why these opera seria, 18th century opera seria are so long. And part of the reason they're not performed all that much nowadays. But people prefer this opera buffa, which rarely, in fact, never have arias in concerto form. I think the last concerto-like aria that he wrote was Martin alla Martin.
Martin alle Dante.
But anyway, that's enough talking. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and Hepikoski and Darcy, they got that typology from me. If you look at their chart, they say, from Gallon, 19, whatever.
Yeah.
Amazing myself, though.
Yes.
Anyway.
So anyone have a question?
Come on, guys. Well, while you were working through the different arias, where did you find the most challenges when working through? I know that there's a lot of ornamentation and especially a lot of repetition in a lot of the pieces. So where did you find the challenges working through each of them?
Well, the ornamentation have like a special approach. You have to know the style first, and it's difficult to work in the ornamentations. But I try to make it a little more simple, because later I was going to speak about the fully ornamentation that it was like the demonstration that Juvenal said. But that approach you have to see it always by the perspective of the style that you are singing when you do the ornamentations.
Then I would like to also ask, what sort of criteria then were you looking at when you were choosing the pieces for each composer that you spoke on?
So it was simple. I choose the first opera that exists, and then I choose the da capo aria. Händel is well known by doing his da capo arias, so he have a lot, and I just choose one of that, and then I choose the first reform opera by Gluck, and the last one, like the Mozart, is just because it's the literal example of the concerto form. Mm-hmm. Any other question?
I have a question. Is there a concerto for voice?
It exists one concerto for voice, and it's I forgot the name of the composer. It's a French contemporary. Was like Lier. And he did the treatment for the voice as the voice is an instrument. So it's just like all the time, like it's a flute or a clarinet or something like that, and it have a full orchestra. But it's not often that we see concertos for voices. Concerto is for instruments, not for voice. But the Exultate Jubilate have the structure from Mozart, by Mozart, have the very well structured the concerto form. Also, its first movement is a concerto form, and then have the slow, but he complemented by recitatives.
But the Exultate Jubilate is a motet.
It's a motet.
So why is it not called a concerto?
No, because they wanted, in the classical era, they wanted to make the difference between the concertos for the instruments and the motete is for the voices.
Did you sometimes feel that Mozart was treating your voice like an instrument rather than a voice?
Yes, because he doesn't have a place to breathe. So it's like almost like a bow. You can have a break. So yes, definitely he was thinking in an instrument when he made it.
I'm sorry, but how old was he when he wrote this?
17 years old.
What was the most interesting thing that you learned in all of your research, to you specifically? What did you find the most interesting about your research?
Well, everything for me was an interesting research. I want to say that here you have this QR, you have more information about this subject, so if you want to scan it, I have a full chart with that information. But the things that I find the most interesting is that we can't just see the approach for a vocal performance as just the voice, as just developed for the voice. It have a lot of influence from the instruments. At the beginning, the voice was like trying to emulate the instruments. So I think it's very important for us singers to see how the instrumentalists they approach to their music, and we also have to know instrumental music to be able to have like an holistic view of the music. That I think that was my thing, what I found the most interesting. And also I have to say the opposite side. I went to the orchestra and invite all of them to see also the influence that the voice have in the instrument, because it's very important for them to understand that symbiosis. That's why that's the name of my lecture.